It's really clear that the issue isn't about the fact that something exists, and for the Christian, it shouldn't be. If the Christian maintains that existence itself must be explained and accounted for, then they've completely shot themselves in the foot insofar as they have failed to explain or account for existence. Hypothesizing the existence of a God not only falls short of solving a question which was originally posed by the Christian in the first place, but it complicates the question even further to a point of absurdity. If there is indeed a problem on the table at all, it wouldn't be about existence itself. It would be about the specific intricacies of existence. And again, like I said, by positing a God, the Christian creates more problems than they propose to solve. So, let me go down the line and review here. Like I said, if the Christian maintains that existence itself must be explained and accounted for, then they have failed to explain and account for it. If the Christian maintains that complexity requires a designer, if we're getting more specific, then they've contradicted themselves because they believe that God's complexity exists undesigned. Let's take it a step further. If they get around that problem by maintaining that physical complexity requires design, whereas non-physical complexity does not, then they have to account for that assertion, which has not happened. And before they even try to account for it, they have to provide evidence for the assertion that non-physical complexity even exists without trying to argue that it must exist because it explains physical complexity. I mean, that's the epitome of circular reasoning right there, and begging the question of your own worldview. This, for example, this is exactly the kind of logical fallacy that things like Occam's razor attempt to prevent. I mean, Occam's razor, you've probably heard of it. All things being equal, simplest explanation tends to be the right one, or KISS, keep it simple, stupid. The actual original wording of Occam's razor, the original definition is, do not multiply entities unnecessarily. In other words, don't add variables to the equation which are just going to get you into more and more trouble. That, if you're going to add a variable to the equation that needs to be explained itself, and then you're going to add an explanation to that needs to be explained itself, and then you're going to add another variable, then you're probably on the wrong track. And that's what Occam's razor tries to, stop people from doing. I mean, you're probably getting farther and farther away from the truth. I mean, the original argument, that sort of teleological, cosmological argument comes from, from a Christian theistic perspective, saying, hey, look, there's this problem. Okay, we've got this problem, we've got this question, and we want to find an answer to that question, and oh, hey, look, I've got the answer over here. I've got the answer to that question. The answer is God. So we should believe in God because God answers this problem. That's why we should believe in God. I want to say that if you are a Christian, and you are using these arguments, the cosmological argument or the teleological argument, and you're using these arguments, that we've just discussed, that God is somehow a solution to these problems, and and then you have to sort of, you're faced with, if you really confront, what you've just made an assumption about when it comes to the universe, if you really confront that, you're sort of forced into a position that you have to justify all these problems, and you start having to do damage control. And instead of, it turns out it's not a pursuit of truth anymore. It's not looking at the facts and then building up from there and sort of, hypothesizing, and then if this doesn't work, or if this doesn't solve the problem, or if this creates more problems, then let's forget about it, let's move on, let's work on finding something else. As a Christian, you're working backwards from a conclusion. You're starting with an assumption, and then you're holding on to anything that'll fit that assumption, and you're letting go of anything that doesn't. And even though something that originally started out, if it were a true pursuit of truth and knowledge, and you hypothesize that God was an answer to these universal, questions of where do we come from and why are we, and then you find out that God, poses more problems than it purports to solve, then you would abandon that concept because it's not efficient. I mean, like I said, Occam's razor. But it's not about that, is it? It's about finding anything you can to justify a belief that you're not going to let go of. Because it's not a pursuit of truth so much as it is defending a conclusion that you're going to stick with no matter what. I try to stay away from, throwing out arguments for the existence of God, and making it like a logical syllogism. I think I'm more into sort of dismantling these ideas that God solves a particular problem or is proven in some particular way. I think it's more reasonable to go in and look at the concept of God and assess it from a point of view of if it were true, what would the ramifications of that be? And then you can sort of back off and you can go, wow, like that's really silly. That's really silly to believe that, given what it might mean and the ramifications of such. I think one of the main reasons that I am an atheist is because I like to think about this stuff, and I think the more you think about it, the more you conclude that it just gets more and more absurd the more you examine it. From a outside perspective, from just a quick glance, that thinking that we're taught from a very young age. We're taught to believe that God exists. A young mind is very impressionable, so we sort of operate from that foundation. The mind, the human brain, is designed to cling on to ideas that parents have provided. It's just a mechanism for survival. I mean, we have to. It's how we work. It's how we are designed. And I think all these arguments for the existence of God end up being a justification for believing something that you're going to believe anyway, rather than a pursuit of truth. And so, God may exist, God may not exist, but if he does in fact exist, and I'm going to try to conclude with this, if God does exist, it's a completely nonsensical random chance occurrence. And it still does nothing to explain the fundamental questions of existence that you, as a Christian, demanded an answer for in the first place. And that's it. All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. And I welcome feedback. All right, take care, everybody.